Okay, we're on to one of the last commands that we'll be dealing with in this stretch. We're talking about the array command. There are a few options. Now, a rectangular array. Think of a cube form. Think of a desk layout. Think of lighting fixtures in a ceiling. Think of mounting brackets for a window. I mean, there's any number of ways that you can specify or use an array. Um, So I'm going to select my rectangular array, and I'm just going to use this guy right here. And I'm done selecting my objects. Press return. And now you notice that all this information here changes because I'm using a command that can really make good use of this. Now, not only do I have columns and rows, but I do have levels. I can make this a three-dimensional array. However, we're not doing three-dimensional work in this course until we get to use of Revit, and that is later on. I think that's somewhere around Thanksgiving, maybe even a little after. So, levels are going to remain at 1. I can change the number of columns either by entering them in, type 5 and return. Likewise, I can do the same with the number of rows. I can change that to 4 if I want. I can change the unit distance between them by typing them in, or I can change the total distance. Or you notice we've got these handy dandy little grips. If I grab this opposite grip, I can come by, instantly make this array much larger or much smaller. I can click just one side of this, move it only in the Y direction, or I can come and I can move it only in the X direction. And as I make changes here, these changes will be made as well. I can also change the unit distance in between these items. So let's say in between my rows, instead of 9 units, I want 12 units. So there we go. Likewise, instead of 9 units over here, I want to make this 8 units. So I can tighten that spacing up. Think of desks in a classroom, perhaps. And when we're done, we'll just close the array. Of course, you can also just push return. There you go. Now the fun part is because these objects are arrayed and we've left them combined, I can come back after the command has been completed and I can still manipulate these. I had one row too many that direction, but I needed one additional row in that direction. So I can make these operations after the command is complete. And that was one of the whole things about doing AutoCAD, was editing what you had already created instead of having to erase everything and start from scratch. Okay. Another option that we have for an array is called a polar array. We're skipping over path array for a moment. I will show you that in a moment when we get to polar. A polar array makes multiple copies of the selected object or objects around a central point. And I'm just going to pick a point here in outer space. And there we go. And at this point, we can still control how many objects, what the unit distance are between them. We can control the number of, click, there we go. We can control how many units are included in the array. We can do that dynamically, or we can type these things in. We can also specify how many rows. It doesn't come in very often, but it will come up from time to time where you might need to specify how many rows in a polar array. The only time I've ever done anything like this is when I'm working on some pretty intense landscaping kind of stuff, where you want to have multiple paths out of, say, a central meadow, and you have this focal point, maybe a fountain or something like that in the middle of the field. You can change all this around, and again, it's all dynamic. I haven't used this tool very often, usually because I don't deal with anything quite that regular. That's a polar array. We now have a path array, which, as long as that path is any single continuous object, now you can use an arc, you can use a polyline, you can use some more complicated objects. It doesn't really matter. That's the object I want to array along a path, and this is the path. And again, I can specify how many objects, like little lemmings dropping off the edge. Pull that back. I'm done with this. Now the nice part is because they're associated with this path. If I modify the path, all those objects will go with it. So once again, that's the power of something being associative. The power of AutoCAD. And there are other CAD platforms that do this. We have here is a polyline with multiple segments. If I do another linear array or another path array, select my objects, and this is my path. There we go. I can still specify the distance in between them. And any modification that I make to this polyline, the array will track. I can stretch it. Ooh, they didn't like me stretching that. That's a new one. Delete a vertex. I'm going to highlight. I can add a vertex back in. And come over here. Convert that back to a line. And then here's a more fun one. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to rotate this so it looks kind of perpendicular to the object we're using, like that. Path array, highlight my object, that's my path. Want to show cars on a roller coaster? This would be a way to do it. This guy, this is actually a spline. That's when you go over here on the draw menu and you can get this little guy right here, a spline. It can be pretty handy. Draw some kind of quasi-organic shapes. This is the closest thing you have to Bezier curves, if you're familiar with Illustrator. Stretch the point, move him around. You can make some really roller coastery looking things, or you can make these pretty subtle. So there's your array tool. There we go. There's array.